And that's the message it seems like we're getting right now from most elected Republicans, even as the president's family seems to be suggesting that those who want to be the future of the Republican Party aren't being loyal enough in this moment. We are hearing an overall message that is much more focused on count the votes, use the process, have faith in the process. I mean, even saying if you can go to the court and the court says you've got standing, okay. That's part of our system. But so far, they are really reinforcing the system itself. And that's really what's separating them potentially from the president.
Well, there's a tension, isn't there, within the Republican Party over this? Because in point of fact, Republicans down the ballot did very well on Tuesday night. So for the president to say, hey, the
Republicans over many weeks heading into the election about, okay, there are so many instances where they didn't stand up to President Trump on things where a lot of their critics said, hey, you should. And I said to them, we know how President Trump's going to handle this. He told us before the election that he was going to do exactly what he did tonight, that he was going to come out and question the results of the election. And almost to a person, they told me in private conversations, we are not ready to give the American experiment over to Donald Trump. This is a line too far. They said, okay, he goes to the courts end up declaring if he's got to win this election in the courts, and the courts say yes, we'll go with that. But if he loses in court, if he loses fair and square, we're going to stand up and say to the American people, this is fair and square. So they are facing, I think, a test they didn't want to have to face. But so far, they are meeting it in the way I was told that they would.
It's a bit that Republicans...
Two things just very quickly. There is... at this point, I don't know. I understand he was talking to people who are close to the president and he's reflecting that position. I just think it's important that we say right now the preponderance of public comments about this from Republicans don't really reflect that. I mean, if you look at the way they've handled the president in the past and you compare it to what they're doing right now, they are not lining up behind him the way they often do. So that is one piece of this. The other piece of this is, I would say, there is no evidence that, I mean, Republican turnout was off the charts. More people voted for President Trump this time than voted for him in 2016. I mean, there is not any evidence that there was depressed turnout for any particular reason among Republicans. The opposite, in fact, to the point that it's how Democrats are in some ways explaining their unexpected losses. They're saying, we assumed all these new voters would vote for us, when in fact we should have assumed, oh, actually Republicans could bring new voters into the process, because the reality is they did.
Well, and I just want to say, because
my Democratic sources that I'm talking to in the state are still saying that while it's going to get closer, they're confident Biden can pull this out with about a 20,000 vote margin. So that's the number I'm looking for. If your board starts to say that the difference is lower than 20,000, then I'll say, okay, we've got a problem here that deviates from the status quo that they've been expecting.
Did you hear?
Well, so if I can just add one thing to this conversation, I mean, since we're talking with Hugh Hewitt, and since the president came out, we have started to see this start to change among Republicans. You had Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, both speaking on Fox News, buying into the president's frame for this. And I just got a note from an operative out in Kansas. They're saying that there's a groundswell coming in from voters who are saying that members should start to call out fraud. So I think that's some direct evidence of just how directly this president speaks to his base and how they react to it.
Here's the bottom line. If there's fraud, then they should file a lawsuit and prove it. And that's the bottom line. If evidence of it, you come to court, you prove your case. That's the way we do it.
The problem is that his supporters are going to believe him, regardless of that process. And so that's why it is so important to point out exactly what you just did.
Well, and that's what Al Gore was saying, that this is a real...
To Chuck's point, I mean, we're looking for statesmen right now, and the country's been very short on that. Statesmen, stateswomen, people who are willing to stand up and think about this in a context that is beyond just running for president next time. Because, you know, we should not lose sight of the fact that this is such an enormous moment in our history, what the president did. We're so used to it, we're almost inured to it because it happens so often. And I think that's one of the questions that's facing every single person, Republican, Democrat, and the fact that Al Gore was willing to come out here and talk about his experience when he never does is evidence that I think a lot of people are feeling that pressure tonight.
Look, I have to say, 2,500 ballots.
Very good.
That's where that comes from.
You've been waiting for that, huh?
You did it on 2 hours sleep, too. But that's also the Supreme Court is kind of waiting.